The Wes Penra Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The Second Level of Learning. http://wespenry.com. Metaphysics Paper Number 3, Our Metaphysical Multiverse. By Wes Penra, Tuesday, July 3, 2012. Revised, Wednesday, December 12, 2012 at 5:50 am. 1. The Unconscious Mind and Causative Dreaming. In this paper we will expand on the concepts of being third-dimensional versus multidimensional, and also give a few new examples of what the differences can be. After have been stuck in this particular frequency band for hundreds of thousands of years, it's deeply rooted in our genes to think linear, particularly since the Industrial Revolution when we became more and more fixated on time, and being on time. Before that, people were more multidimensional and saw things and experienced things that would be considered out of the ordinary by most people today. We would call them superstitious. Our minds are working on different levels to such an extent that it would be appropriate to consider a person's collective mind being compartmentalized into several different layers, where the logical, conscious mind would be the third-dimensional, 3D, mind, the mind that is very analytical. On this level everything has to be explained, categorized, catalogued, be logical, non-fluid, and linear, to make sense. It's the mind of the five senses: what you see with your eyes, hear with your ears, smell with your nose, taste with your mouth, and touch with your body is what is real and what you get. To think that something could exist outside of that would really stretch the logical mind, and it doesn't like it, because it likes to be in control. There are other compartments of the minds, however, that work on a much deeper and more flexible level, such as the subconscious mind, which registers on a non-conscious level everything that happens on the 3D level. It's the fight or flight part of the mind, which also registers trauma, pain, fear, and other emotions unwanted in daily life. Then, when a similar situation which would be considered a threat to survival to the subconscious mind occurs, it comes to the surface and alerts the person of the danger so he/she can decide whether to avoid or confront the situation. It has a connection to what scientists call the reptilian brain. We can decide how thoroughly we want to go into the different layers of the mind, but for the purpose of this paper, we will skip through the rest of the layers and go directly down to the unconscious mind, which is that of dream state, but also the part of the mind which is nonlinear and sometimes non-logical from a 3D point of view. It is very fluid. The unconscious mind is a pretty important mind to concentrate on in these times. Although the logical mind, the ego with capital E, is important too so we can function in our everyday lives in linear time, it is extremely limited. Some say we only use 10% of our brain capacity, and this may be true, but brain capacity is not the only way to measure our awareness level. I would say we use much less than 10% of our potentials when we are living in the typical 3D reality. But if we work with the figures we have, and we only use 10% of our capacity, the other 90% is hidden within the unconscious mind. Many psychics and New Agers say that the dream state is very important. They say that when you dream and wake up during the night, make sure you write down what you remember, but not the whole dream, only a few key words that make you recall your dream the next morning. Continue to do so until you remember more and more of your dreams. By learning to recall them, you can become more cause over the events in your dreams. Those who already have a tendency to remember their dreams can tell us that the events in dream state don't always make sense and are rarely linear. Things happen, apparently in a random fashion, and if the dream has a particular story to it, events often don't happen in a linear way, and unlikely characters may pop in and out of the dream. Some dreams are seemingly random and don't have any particular order to them, and we usually say that they don't make sense. Dreaming is a way to process events in our lives that we haven't been able to process to our satisfaction from our limited 3D perspective. Dreams go deeper but rarely give you direct solutions, although it can happen, but give you hints and solutions that are either decoded or encrypted so that we still need to find the solution in our daily lives. However, we can use the tools in dream state to speed up the process. I talked about dreams and the unconscious mind in level I as well, but the reason I am coming back to talk about this subject again is because it is so important to understand that it is in fact the dream state which to a large degree forms the reality in our everyday life. First we dream it, then we live it. This may sound unreal to many, but I truly believe this is how it works. Therefore, it is a very good practice to work on realizing that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. E.g., when something happens in your dream that you don't like, tell yourself, "Ah, this is a dream," and then start to manipulate it. You will be able to change events, add characters to your dream, take unwanted characters out of it, and totally change the outcome more to your satisfaction. Some people can already do this, but the trick is to be able to do it regularly and ultimately all the time, in every dream. Be aware that you're dreaming and change things around, but still let the dream be fluid and don't necessarily make it linear and logical. Just change a little event here and a little event there. Let the rest have its flow and just observe, like a spectator who is watching a movie who wants to see how it ends but still wants to interact every now and then. What happens when you interfere with your dreams and you realize you're dreaming is that the conscious mind is interacting with the unconscious mind, and this is exactly what we want. It's one key to becoming aware so we can perceive other realms and other dimensions outside the third. We all have the potentials to do so because we were created to be able to, but we have been taught to forget how to do this, and manipulated to believe that such abilities don't exist. But they do. 2. The differences between interdimensional, multidimensional, and omnidimensional. Someone pointed out to me recently that using the term multidimensional is incorrect. When we are talking about being multidimensional, this person says we are really talking about omnidimensional, because we have access to all dimensions, omni meaning all. I will show why I think this is not entirely correct. As I see it, the terms interdimensional, multidimensional, and omnidimensional are three totally different concepts, although sometimes we see them mixed together, which can be confusing. So let's see if we can come to terms with this subject as well. As usual, when addressing the logical mind, listing is the best way to do it. If beings are interdimensional, it means they are either stationary in a certain dimension, e.g. the third dimension, but have the ability to travel and explore all the other dimensions of that particular universe as they wish, or they are not stationary in any particular dimension, but are free to travel all dimensions they want. And here is exactly where the problem is, because if we consider this being omnidimensional we limit ourselves in our thinking into believing there is only one universe. As we have discussed in the previous chapter, there are an infinite potential of ponds, with universes grouped together in each pond. You have an overseer over each universe, and one for each pond, but these highly evolved beings are still only multidimensional, and only the Mother Goddess, Source, has access to all dimensions in all universes that are in existence, or have ever existed. Therefore, there is only one omnidimensional being in existence that we can perceive of at the moment, and that is the Mother Goddess. This leaves us with four different concepts: dimensional, interdimensional, multidimensional, and omnidimensional. We can continue and classify these in different subgroups, but that goes outside the purpose of this book. If we stick with these three, they would mean 1. Dimensional. In metaphysics, we speak of dimensional as being restricted to experiencing only one, or a few dimensions, while the rest of the dimensions are either intentionally blocked out from a being or a star race, or the being/species has not yet evolved enough to understand how dimensions work and how to travel them. An example of a dimensional being would be the average human. It is not that the being doesn't have access to all dimensions, only that they don't know how to access them yet. 2. Interdimensional. This means not being stuck in any dimension and not necessarily having a home station either, at least not in the sense we look at it. An interdimensional star being is something similar to a cosmic nomad, who has abandoned the planet where they developed and evolved and is now traveling the universe without a body, and can visit all dimensions at will. LPGC terms these beings onto energetics def. 3. Multidimensional, definition number 1. You are multidimensional when you have become an intergalactic being. You have evolved enough to understand the structure of the universe and that it consists of a vast amount of dimensions, and you have learned how to access them from the dimension you are in. You can, at will, nano-travel these dimensions at will, while still having a body on a planet somewhere. You can fragment your fire and send the fragments out on missions anywhere in the universe. Multidimensional, definition number 2. You are multidimensional as well when you are an overseer of a pond of universes and a multiple of ponds. You now have access to not only the dimensions of a particular universe, but also all dimensions of the other universes you are overseeing. However, you are still not omnidimensional. Multidimensional, definition number 3. You are multidimensional when you understand that every thought you create behind which you put a strong emotion and intention creates your own version of the multiverse. You change the multiverse you live in a little bit every time you make such a thought. Then, when you act upon it, it will be the multiverse where your main attention is located. 4. Omnidimensional. There is only one omnidimensional being we are aware of, and that is Source, Mother Goddess. She has access to any dimension in any pond and/or universe she has ever created. Remember that although there are different overseers of different universes, it is the Goddess who created them all, at least that is as far as I can tell at this point. There is sometimes a mix-up between the terms universe and multiverse. This is understandable due to that there are so many theories on what is and what is not. A universe is a creation, in form of a sphere, some say a spiral, and would correspond with what LPGC terms for space/time. It is extracting and contracting, sometimes described as the breath of the goddess. The goddess breathes out and the universe is expanding, she is breathing in and it is contracting. A universe is, from what I've learned, consisting of galaxies, nebulae, stars, planets etc. with a certain amount of accessible dimensions. It is all these things combined. The multiverse as I see it can be one of two major things. Others may define multiverse differently. 1. We create our own multiverse in our minds. Every time we make a choice we have different options. To be in the reality we are in, we made choices and followed through on them until we came to points where we had to make even more choices and so forth and so on. When we make a choice, we discard the other options, but because we think of them, they become real in certain terms, as probable versions of the multiverse. Therefore, when we make a choice, the other options create alternative probabilities that branch out from the series of options we had. These other options become alive, but if they are not acted upon, they stay as thought forms, and remain alive, but dormant, in the fluidity of the multiverse. We are creating multiverses all the time with our own thoughts and actions. See def of multidimensional above. When we think something and act upon it, we add our choice to the multiverse we lived in a second ago. If we had chosen another option, the first version of the multiverse, where we made another, different choice, wouldn't exist. So every thinking being in the multiverse is contributing to how the version of the universe they live in will look like. If you grasp this concept, it should be mind-blowing, because it shows you that there are almost endless versions of the universe. These nearly endless versions become a multiverse, an expanding multiverse. You jump in and out of realities all the time when you think a thought, make a choice and live out your decision. There are other versions of the multiverse where the consequences of that decision don't exist. So it's the combined choices you have made since you were born as a fire that determines which version of the multiverse you live in right now when you're reading this. Next time you make a choice, you jump realities. Hence, your neighbor is part of your multiverse, but she also has her own multiverse which differs from yours, because she is not making the same decisions as you do. 2. The unum, which LPGC calls the multiverse, is what holds the goddess creation together, but within this unum-like multiverse, the first definition of multiverses, above, exist because of the constant bouncing of thoughts between the thought boundary, T-boundary, and the known universe, as LPGC calls it. 3. A multiverse is a whole pond filled with universes or several ponds filled with universes, or perhaps even a superpond consisting of smaller ponds, all consisting of universes. Therefore, Being multidimensional doesn't necessarily mean, in this definition, that you are living in a multiverse, except on an abstract level, because the universes are not connected in the sense that beings can visit them at will, only by invitation. Multidimensional means you are living in a universe consisting of multiple dimensions that you freely can access. The confusion has been that many of us have equaled the term multiverse with being multidimensional. A multiverse, per definition, is therefore more than one version of the universe. 4. The multiverse is composed of all physical and non-physical dimensions and probable versions of reality, as well as the Milky Way galaxy's innumerable stars and planets, other galaxies that make up the universe, along with other universes and as yet unrealized potentials of existence. Most of the time, I will use definition number 1 when speaking of the multiverse here in my papers. If I use number 2, I will mention that I do so. The omniverse can be two things as well, as I look upon it. 1. All the multiverses counted together to become one omniverse. We are rarely using this definition, because it's hard to perceive all multiverses, because they are fluid and change all the time. Still, in theory, when we want to talk about all multiverses, created by all beings in a multiverse, we can use the term omniverse. 2. The summary of all created universes, multiverses, pawns etc., that the goddess has created so far. It is ever expanding on many levels and she is the only one who has access to the full omniverse. Here on Earth, we can understand the concepts of these things, but still not be able to access all these dimensions. There is not how it was meant to be. We were supposed to have access to all dimensions at will when we had evolved enough as young spirits, but this is not the case on our planet. There is a reason for this which will be explained later, and the whole purpose with this level of learning, so there's nothing wrong with you if you still are stuck with being third-dimensional. Work needs to be done before we get access to the rest of the multiverse. Important to understand here too is that not until we let our conscious mind, which is related to the five senses, step back from its leading position and create room for the unconscious mind that we can start becoming truly multidimensional. We need to welcome and acknowledge the fluidness of the universe, the part of reality which is not linear and not always logical in the sense we're used to. It is in this fluidness that we can create anything we wish to create. Metaphorically, we can imagine an existence where we float around in a fluid substance, which is, and is not, at the same time. With our thoughts we can take this fluidness and create something from it, just like we sometimes can do in your dreams. This is why it's so helpful to be able to know when we're dreaming and can start creating a new scenario in dream state, being the creator and the spectator at the same time. Being multidimensional is quite the same thing. We can create outcomes the way we want them to be. In a multidimensional reality there would still be intentions/counter-intentions that clash and the strongest intention wins, but because of the fluidness of the universe and our own openness, awareness level and willingness to embrace the Mother's creation, we will find it much easier to create, and it will be more instant than it is here in the solidness of 3D. So now we have talked about the dream state, but are there other ways of dreaming than what we experience when we go to sleep? There certainly is. What about daydreaming and how about your own imagination? These two things are basically the same, and they are extremely important if we want to connect with the Goddess universe. Actually, it is crucial. We humans need to use our imagination much more than we do and start creating things in our minds, things that we really want, ways we want to live. We can't really reach delta state, which is dream state, by doing it, but we still change from a solid 3D, 5 senses reality to a fluid brainwave pattern which is connecting us to the void. Have you ever, maybe as a child, sat and created your own little world when you were playing? If you are a musician or a fine artist, a writer, a researcher, or something similar to this, when you have followed your passion, in other words, isn't that when you have been the happiest in your life? We can't be truly happy if we are not in some small way, at least, connected to Source, and we are not connected to Source when we are staying totally and utterly in the 4% universe. None of this means that we should neglect the conscious mind, it's just as important. We need to stay grounded here on Earth, the conscious mind, and let the unconscious mind surface and use that to co-create with the conscious mind. The unconscious mind has access to the sub-quantum soul level, and when you can access it at will, you can also fragment yourself and travel through space and time. This is not a secret to many children. When they are little, and if we let them create freely, they have no problems accessing this part of the mind. Before indoctrination starts all over again, the child is very open-minded and often quite psychic and non-judgmental. Children often have much more of the mother's universal ways surfaced than most adults, I am tempted to say, any adults. Childhood is the most creative stage in a person's life, unfortunately. Unfortunately, because if we could continue using our abilities from childhood into adulthood, our civilization would become multi-D rather quickly. Some people have had a very traumatic childhood and can perhaps not relate to what I've said here. In that case, if you are one of them, I just want to acknowledge you and tell you that I empathize with you and want to let you know that you can still tune into these vibrations and overcome the horror and fear you may have experienced. So much more important than to study and apply materials which support what I am talking about here. While I'm writing this article, I check out my Facebook and find something posted by a good friend of mine from the Netherlands, researcher Bart van der Swan. This picture, and the text in the next paragraph, show us how busy we are, and how little we, as adults, notice and participate in our environment. However, it also shows that kids are the ones who are still more in tune with what is going on around us, and not so caught up in the narrow tunnel, which has become our reality. A man sat at a metro station in Washington, D.C. and started to play the violin. It was a cold January morning. He played 6 Bach pieces for about 45 minutes. During that time, since it was rush hour, it was calculated that 1,100 people went through the station, most of them on their way to work. 3 minutes went by, and a middle-aged man noticed there was musician playing. He slowed his pace, and stopped for a few seconds, and then hurried up to meet his schedule. A minute later, the violinist received his first dollar tip. A woman threw the money in the till and without stopping, and continued to walk. A few minutes later, someone leaned against the wall to listen to him, but the man looked at his watch and started to walk again. Clearly he was late for work. The one who paid the most attention was a 3-year-old boy. His mother tagged him along, hurried, but the kid stopped to look at the violinist. Finally, the mother pushed hard, and the child continued to walk, turning his head all the time. This action was repeated by several other children. All the parents, without exception, forced them to move on. In the 45 minutes the musician played, only 6 people stopped and stayed for a while. About 20 gave him money, but continued to walk their normal pace. He collected $32. When he finished playing and silence took over, no one noticed it. No one applauded, nor was there any recognition. No one knew this, but the violinist was Joshua Bell, one of the most talented musicians in the world. He had just played one of the most intricate pieces ever written, on a violin worth $3.5 million. 2 days before his playing in the subway, Joshua Bell sold out at a theater in Boston where the seats averaged $100. This is a real story. Joshua Bell playing incognito in the metro station was organized by the Washington Post as part of a social experiment about perception, taste, and priorities of people. The outlines were, in a commonplace environment at an inappropriate hour, do we perceive beauty? Do we stop to appreciate it? Do we recognize the talent in an unexpected context? One of the possible conclusions from this experience could be, if we do not have a moment to stop and listen to one of the best musicians in the world playing the best music ever written, how many other things are we missing? The good news is that there is a way out for everybody, no matter background or current life situation. We are living in a constant now and there is nowhere else we can create than from this now. Therefore, whatever happened in the past, whatever led up to the life situation you may have today, it can be changed in a moment by just changing your thought patterns as soon as you let go of the blame most of us have towards those who may have had a hand in getting us where we are in any situation we don't want to be in. Remember that everything is a co-creation, and when you realize that although there may have been others who contributed to the situation, the decisions to go along with it were yours. Once you truly see that, everything changes your whole worldview, in fact. Not until then can you make progress. When the blame and the grudges you may hold are out the window, analyze your thoughts and realize which thoughts are counterproductive and which ones are helpful in order to achieve your true goals. Throw the first ones out and keep and expand on the second ones. Practice. In reality, that is all it takes to turn things around. The doingness, which eventually is required, will come naturally, and you are going to do it willingly, with enthusiasm. The person, who may have done you wrong simply has to take care of his or her own issues and you take care of yours. You are not contributing to anything positive by hanging on to blame, except you give a lot of power to the other person. 3. Different types of metaphysical entities and entity possession. In level I talked some about non-physical entities, much so when we were discussing the LPGC material. As time goes and our species progresses, we are going to have to deal with non-physicals as well as beings who appear in the physical. They are both here and have been here on Earth and Earth near space for quite a while. They know this is the end of the nanosecond they are present to participate, and many of them are here to get their piece of the pie, but some of them are also here to help us evolve. Although, we have to be careful, because even many of those who seem to have our very best interests in mind have an agenda of some sort. The rest, who don't have any other agenda than to see us succeed, are often lurking in the background without interfering too much, because of the law of free will and the law of non-interference, which inhibit them from interfering directly with a species' evolvement process, unless that species specifically asks for help. I read the Pleiadian newsletters, number 76, Winter Solstice, 2011 a while ago, where they brought up non-physical entities. I found what they said quite interesting. These energies come in many shapes and forms, but generally occupy three main categories, and I feel I need to bring this up, because we are going to talk a lot about entity possession in this second level of learning. So we have the earthbound, or unquiet dead, the mischief makers, the dark forces, or demons. What these beings all have in common is that they can take over bodies, seemingly without permission. They do not subscribe to the universal law of non-interference. This may not be real to people, but it is amazingly common that people are possessed in one way or the other, much more common than even professional psychics in this area of expertise think. Normally we think of a possessed person like someone from the movie The Exorcist or similar, which is possession in its extreme, but usually it is more subtle. The person is acting in one way at one point and in another way at another point, and it often baffles the environment. People may find the possessed person rather strange in their behavior, but may not think beyond that. Another typical sign is self-destruction. The person may be an alcoholic, a drug addict, have severe mental problems, or is having obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, or being bipolar. Note that a person doesn't necessarily have to be possessed to have the two latter conditions, but it's very likely, and even more so when being an alcoholic or drug addict. Others do destructive things towards other people, they steal, rape, murder, are child abusers and even worse. They may go out and do school shootings. These people are often possessed through government trauma-based mind control. The common thing for the worst criminals is that they often have no idea why they were doing it, their true motives lie hidden. When they are on trial and tell the court that they have no memories of the incident, or Satan told me to do it, not many people believe them and think they just want to get away with it and get a milder verdict in form of psychiatric care and then be back on the street again in no time, but more often than not, the person is telling the truth. It doesn't justify the crime, but it's a matter of fact. And people are correct, the jury is often coming to the conclusion that it was temporary insanity, or insanity, that drew the criminal to the crime, and the person may soon be out on the street again. Untreated and not being exorcised and put back into society again is a big mistake, and the person will most likely fall back into crime again, because the non-physicals who possess them don't care about the well-being of the bio-mind, body/mind, that they possess. If the person gets a death sentence? Fine. The non-physical jumps to another body. They get a thrill out of it, and they feel they don't have to take the consequences. The Pleiadians tell us in the same newsletter that people who are possessed, to be able to evolve, first have to recognize that they are possessed. This requires a certain awareness level. The good news is that the original owner of the body, the soul who inhabits the body from birth, can evolve in spite of the attached entity, although the entity may implant destructive thoughts trying to prevent the owner from getting better, unless it suits the purpose of the entity. Here it is important to have some assistance from another person who is backing him or her up so the possessed person can reach a point where they can be causative enough to handle the situation. People hosting intrusive non-physical entities, say the Pleiadians, must be aware enough to recognize the circumstances, be willing to learn their spiritual lessons. What they mean by this is that everything is a co-creation on a higher level and therefore a spiritual learning lesson. A person who is possessed may or may not have an agreement with the non-physical, who often attach without permission, but the spiritual lesson connected to it is a co-creation on one level or another, a necessity to be able to evolve. These can also be people who have been on a spiritual journey for quite a while, spanning over many different lifetimes, but have had a hard time creating their own space. Persons who are possessed need to learn how to clean their energy fields and have the strength of character and presence of mind to do so. Important is to cancel and terminate any previous agreements with the entity/entities and then release them and let them go. Some people can have up to a few hundred entities attached to them, say the Pleiadians, but I would suggest some may have more than that, although some are dormant. We will see this becoming more and more common as things get wilder and wilder, especially now at the end of the nanosecond, when the acceleration reaches its maximum and the gas pedal is hitting the floor. To get rid of attachments is not as easy as it sounds, because the host, the original person, needs to change the behaviors which attached the entities in the first place. Such circumstances could be, but are not limited to, alcohol, frequent partying, drug use, street drugs and even prescribed medication, both which make you leave your body without first have claimed your space and energy field. So if frequent partying was what attached the non-physical, the first thing you need to do is to stop partying. Then notice any unnatural behavior in yourself which you think is odd and something you would never do with good conscience. Also recognize thought patterns that are destructive or manipulative. Stop the behaviors that you find odd and out of character, because these are the behaviors the non-physical thrives on and could in fact be the entity itself, acting out. Also, when someone else's thoughts come into your head, think to the thought, "That's not my thought and I'm not going to acknowledge it and definitely not act upon it." Then you leave it with that, but repeat this pattern every time you get a thought that's out of character. You will see that these thoughts will decrease with time, because the non-physical notices that you are aware of its presence and may leave when it feels it has lost its power. The purpose for being there in the first place can no longer be accomplished. Now, let us discuss the three different non-physical categories listed above, one by one. 3.1 The Earthbound or the Unquiet Dead. The earthbound or the unquiet dead are the lost souls who dwell in the lower astral planes around Earth. These are the ones who don't know where to go after body death. Many of them still don't understand that they are dead. Sudden death, traumatic death, and death on a battlefield etc., can easily make a soul lost if its level of consciousness is not that high. A person who is aware of that he or she is a spiritual being in a body, and that after the body has exhausted its abilities to continue assisting the soul and stops functioning, the soul moves on to the next level of existence and is very unlikely going to be lost, no matter what happens. Unfortunately, many people don't have the awareness to understand that they are spirits running a body, and then things like this can happen every now and then. The unquiet dead can easily jump into the body of someone who is overly empathetic, too wide open and lacks strong boundaries. Here I need to mention people in the New Age movement who start channeling non-physical entities. It is nothing wrong with channeling in general, but like I have mentioned many times before, the person who is willing to take on these entities has to have an extraordinary strong body, good genetics, and be in great physical shape. If the person does not have all these attributes, their body is eventually going to deteriorate and get fried. We've seen that happen way too often with channelers. And even more importantly, once a person notices they have the ability to channel, they get very excited and want to take on more and more entities to channel, just because it's so interesting and educating. First of all, very few channeled entities are whom they say they are, and even if they are, it doesn't mean they will tell you the truth. Most of them have an agenda, so the channeler has to be very careful with whom they speak. By being open to any entity who wants to tell you something, you open yourself up to entity possession, not only unquiet dead, but all sorts of demons and entities. Unfortunately, many people in the New Age movement are more than willing to be wide open. The unquiet dead are not necessarily malevolent, they are just lost and miss their body. Therefore, they attach to whatever/whomever they can, often they attach to a friend on the battlefield who survived the battle. Still, these souls will create an unwanted imbalance for the host, because they will have constant intrusions to their thought patterns and privacy. The intruding soul will also drain energy from the host and alter behavior, tastes, habits, and directions in life. 3.2 The Mischief Makers and the Jinns. This category includes aliens, anomalous beings, and other worldly dimensional characters, to quote the Pleiadians 4. These entities are often dishonest and conniving, and they like to entice the host into self-destructive acts. They create confusion in the mind of the host. They are experts in convincing people whom they possess that they, the intruders, are the person and make the host lie and get involved in unethical, and sometimes criminal activities. They don't care about the host or the body at all, but enjoy seducing a person into dishonesty and thievery. They may make the host so dissociative and detached from their everyday responsibilities and moral obligations that they are totally unaware of that something is wrong. They start seeing the world differently from the average person and can't believe others don't see what they see. We call these entities mischief makers, and this may make us think about jinns, or jinns, genies, and these fall under this category as well, because the mischief makers as well as the jinns can take physical shape and form if they want to do so. Jinn is just another word for aliens who are capable of using their avatar to mock up a body of whatever shape and form they want, as described in previous chapter. They are the onto-energetics. Michael Lee Hill, the musician I interviewed in Level I, whom at the Sirius Festival had entered the genie bottle and met with the shapeshifters, and whom Hill thinks could have been Marduk himself and his consort, were basically subjected to jinns or mischief makers, whom are in this case most probably the Anunnaki, non-physical ETS and jinns being the same thing. 3.3 The Dark Forces, or Demons. Demon is a term that goes way back in time, and something that everybody is familiar with to one degree or another. The Judeo-Christian religions are of course clear as of what they are, Satan's creations. These very dark forces are by many considered the most troublesome of them all. People often rightly indicate when a person is prone to obsessive, destructive, and very dark and evil acts, that he or she is possessed by a demon. This dark side influence has been acknowledged not only by the Judeo-Christian religions, but by all religions, although they are known under different names. In these current days, which we call the end times, non-physical entities are entering our realms en masse. Some are here to help, while others are here to feed from our energies. In the background, human elite and hybrids are performing dark rituals to call up other dimensional entities, and some groups are even opening up portals to other, lower dimensions to let demons and dark forces in. And what are demons? Are they aliens? I would not personally categorize them as aliens or ETS. They exist in the lower astral planes around Earth, but can move into our dimension if called upon, and can stay here if they attach to human bodies. Just as certain ETS, demons feed from fear, blood, and allegedly, flesh as well, although these reports are rarer. I don't know if they exist elsewhere in the universe, but I would be utterly surprised if they didn't. They are low-frequency entities, vampires that feed on energy. Where they basically came from, I don't know for sure, although, Like I said, the Bible has one explanation for it. But if they are Satan's servants, then we have to define Satan, which we are going to do in a later paper. When do demons show up? Certainly on battlefields, that has been proven over and over by soldiers in present and ancient times, who saw these entities, both in the middle of a battle and in the aftermath amongst the hundreds of dead and wounded soldiers. It's very important that we humans stop participating in war. Many a good, young soldier has lost their life in battle for no good reason. Even if it on the surface looks like our soldiers are defending our nation, we are fighting the wars of the elite, the super rich, whose children rarely have to go to war, unless their parents want to punish them for being lazy or want them to become men. And behind war and general disaster we have interdimensional beings who pull the strings. The common denominator is that they always use humans as cannon fodder, and we fall into their trap every time. Still so after all these millennia. It's time to learn our lesson. Laying down the sword and walk away is another sign of spiritual maturity. War is ignorance. If you meet a person who is obviously possessed by an evil entity, it's not wise to step forward and tell them they're possessed. If you do, you will most likely talk to the entity and not the person you are trying to help. If it's a good friend, I would sit down and talk to them, calmly and with a lot of love. When the entity starts speaking, either ignore him and continue speaking to the real person, or tell the entity that you know that it is not the person who owns the body that you're talking to, and that you don't want to talk to it, but to the real person. Then you continue talking directly to your friend and ignore the entity after that. You can't, and I repeat, you can't argue with the entity. It can be right out dangerous, but best scenario is that it will not change anything to the better, because the attached entity won't change. Then, when the real person realizes he or she is possessed, they may want to do something about it, either try on their own, which may be difficult, or actually go see an exorcist. Sometimes you can see if a person is possessed by looking into their eyes. You can see the entity in there. If you're aware enough, you can even see your own entity possession by looking in the mirror, if you have entity attachments. Don't run to the mirror and imagine things just because of this, though, because there has to be a reason why you look yourself in the mirror for this purpose in the first place. You need to have the signs. Some of these signs are when a person says, for example, I don't know what ran into me, I don't know what made me do it, I don't know what came over me, or I don't know what possessed me, on a more or less regular basis. 5. You get the picture. It's not always the case, though, because people have a tendency to repeat what other people have said before them to describe a situation, but if the person saying something to this effect, if not possessed themselves, may know someone who is, from where they heard these expressions in the first place. 3.4 Afterlife and entity possession. The Pleiadians are not the only ones saying that sometimes spiritual attachments do not necessarily disappear when a person dies and leaves the body, and that the attachment may follow into the afterlife. This is why it's so important, something I have said many times in the past as well, that when loved ones die, we need to tell them that we want them to let go. We need to tell their soul, which usually hangs around the family for a while, that we are sad and will miss this individual, but it's okay to move on. Sometimes lovers promise each other that they will always be together, and if one dies before the other, the first to go waits for the other. This is not a good way to arrange for the afterlife, because this could lead to that whoever went first will attach to the one left, or another family member, just to stay around. Instead, if you want to make a bond with your partner, tell each other that you will meet in the afterlife, and so, that will most probably happen. That's where we often meet with our deceased loved ones anyway. If the dying person is of a higher consciousness, it may even be appropriate to suggest they go in a totally different direction after death. I advise the reader to review the paper, There is a Light at the End of the Tunnel: What Happens After Body Death. 6. If you are curious about what happens after we die, what is very important is that before you die, make sure you have an exit plan. Think about where you want to go and what you want to get out of the afterlife. Maybe share it with your loved ones and ask them if your plan is something they would consider too, or perhaps something similar to it. You don't have to have the exact same plan to be able to meet again, though, you simply have to decide that you will. And moreover, when you're done reading these papers, you may want to make a totally different exit plan from any human before you. I will explain what I mean by this in one of the last papers in the level of learning. The Pleiadians are fully aware of the traps that are set up for us after we exit. They are not always clean-cut about it, because some information simply has to wait until the right time, but they suggest that we banish our fears of dying, and fears in general, and die with courage, using the same vigor that propelled us into this life. They advise us to leave this world with sweet respect and gratitude for all our creations. Death is the beginning of another grand adventure. They also add that we need to leave with love in our hearts, a clean conscience and with clear intentions to go to the next level of expanded awareness, and your spirit will take you there. The universe is fluid and we have the power to break any boundaries and walls if we have the right intentions. It is my belief that at this time we are still controlled in the afterlife and don't have the freedom we would have if our reality wasn't manipulated, but we can still move within the limits of the boundaries that are set up for us, and hopefully, with the splitting of the worlds and the knowledge and awareness we are gaining as we speak, we can break the hypnotic spell that is put upon us. Much more about this later. 4. The dangers of only embracing love and light. In the global elite-controlled New Age movement, the spiritual seeker is often told to only embrace what is good, and ignore what is evil, or to put it in another way, you embrace love and light and ignore darkness. The theory behind this is that if you concentrate only on what is positive, the negative will diminish and the person can ascend to a higher dimension or density. I beg to differ. I strongly embrace the thought that we need to acknowledge all sides of ourselves and reality, whether it's light or darkness, because it's all part of us. Why do you think they want us to embrace only the positive side of ourselves, others, and our environment? Because if we do, they can control it. When we don't look at what we call the negative side of things, A. We become ignorant to this big percentage of reality, B. By suppressing this side of ourselves it's like putting the lid on a barrel that is filling up. Eventually the lid will explode, and C. The global elite and the interdimensional forces who control them can easily control the New Age movement, which doesn't know enough about the dark side. The controllers then come from the dark side and use the light side to manipulate the positive thinkers, who then are clueless that they are being manipulated through love and light channeling, and different not-so-benevolent gurus. It's up to us to look inside and get to know ourselves, that's the only true road to freedom. Often we actually need to look at the dark side before we can see the real light. And with dark I don't mean as in dark space, but as in negative emotions, negative thoughts, evil intentions, regrets, shame, guilt, etc. You probably get the drift. We also need to understand that there is a conspiracy, how it is set up to control our lives, who they are, and what they are doing, before we have the slightest chance to evolve without being totally deceived. Even then we are not immune, but it's getting easier and easier to see through the deceptions. If I didn't know much about the forces behind this reality, I would myself be trapped in some New Age movement of love and light right now, listening to channeled material promising us salvation in form of ascension to the 4th and 5th dimensions. This is why I set up Illuminati News first, http://illuminati-news.com, with the intention to create an enormous database, covering most important aspects of the conspiracy. My thought was at the time, 1998, to create a website which included articles that could interest truth seekers and others, no matter from which walk in life they come. Then, when the person catches interest in an article, they may be willing to read more, and finally learn about what's going on behind the scenes. Then, and first then, will they be ready for this material. So there are steps, or levels of learning from the time when we are totally ignorant until we grasp a bigger picture, and dive into the great unknown from there on. Sometimes the truth seeker mixes spiritual research with the dark stuff, which is of course also a way to do it. I want to add one little thing here when comes to conspiracies. We are often talking about a new world order that is about to be implemented and a cabal that is working hard to take over the world. This part of it is false, something I think it's time that we realize. The idea of taking over the world by some dark cabal coming closer and closer is more alive now than it's ever been amongst conspiracy researchers and truth seekers. The truth of the matter is that the world is already taken over. We have been slaves under a global cabal since the beginning of mankind. Sometimes there has been internal fighting between factions of this cabal, and countries and empires have changed owners, still within the same bloodlines, however, but they have always been in control on a global scale. So those who are waiting for the cabal to take over the world are waiting in vain, they have always been in charge. 5. Dr. Greer's Disclosure Project in a New Dark. Some of the most naive and misleading information regarding the UFO and alien phenomena is that which is coming from Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project and Dr. Richard Boylan's ideas when comes to UFO disclosure. I mentioned this a couple of times in Level I as well. They try to make you think very one-sided. They want us to embrace all ETS out there as our space brothers, and that there are no negative aliens in Earth near space right now. Dr. Carol Rosin, Dr. Stephen Greer's right hand in the Disclosure Project, said in an interview, now on YouTube, that if there were any negative aliens here they would have invaded a long time ago. When I heard that, I knew for a fact that she is either extremely naive or she is misleading us on purpose. After all, Dr. Rosin is an intelligent woman, but her statement is not. Why doesn't she take into account that the negative aliens have been here since Homo sapiens, or Homo sapiens sapiens, as Sitchin calls us, were created, and that's why there is a global elite? Doesn't it occur to her that so far, they haven't had any interest in invading us, because they already have us in their grip? She doesn't even mention this as a possibility. Red flag, red flag. Yes, she is talking about fake alien invasions, such as Project Blue Beam, where a holographic landing which is not real will take place to gather all humanity under one flag. That's as far as it gets when comes to negative ETS and invasions, she says. She then refers to the ex-Nazi scientist, Werner von Braun, whom she worked with until he died. Werner von Braun was transported from Nazi Germany after World War II in Project Paperclip, please Google this if it is unfamiliar to you, to secretly work for the US government, who actually transported a lot of Nazi scientists to the US at that time, one of them the notorious Dr. Joseph Mengele, one of the most evil men this world has seen in modern times. All of them were put on projects in their field of expertise to be able to develop secret space programs, mind control programs, and even expanding on the Nazi ability to build flying saucers. Drive von Braun told his assistant, Carol Rosin, that the last card that will be pulled out from the sleeve of the global elite is the alien card. With this he meant a fake alien invasion. I am sure von Braun was right. Project Blue Beam is one of many projects that are still on the table. However, we must remember that within the secret government everything is told on a need-to-know basis. If von Braun thought he knew it all, he was certainly deceiving himself. How about if the secret government is actually run by a malevolent ET race, and Project Blue Beam is a part of the whole scenario to bring the rest of their club to the table to ring in Bible prophecies and other prophecies as well? What about if a holographic attack of an alien space armada is the front for something much more sinister? Who says that an invading alien force comes in spaceships? What I mean by this will be obvious after you have finished all the papers in Level 2. Also, the 5,000 witnesses Dr. Greer put on the stand more than 10 years ago all worked for the government, or were ex-military, or ex-government, often in high places. I am not saying all these people were lying, but for all we know, Dr. Greer could have handpicked whom he wanted on the stand, which has showed to be the case, according to a few whistleblowers who have come forward and were not allowed to be among the witnesses, because they had a more sober view on their experiences with ETS, and secondly, who knows they are ex-military and government. The ET craft the witnesses saw were probably either built on Earth, but somewhere within the solar system, both by ETS and the shadow government, by people who have a much higher clearance than any of the witnesses. And the ETS that the witnesses saw were either mocking themselves up as such with the purpose to be seen, or they put themselves in the head of the beholder and manipulated them to see something that never happened. If people only knew what kind of technology these ET races have and what an interdimensional ET is capable of even without technology. To understand this, we have to think outside our 3D reality. We will go into this much more soon, but I want to say that even these 5,000 witnesses did not necessarily see what they thought they saw. They saw what the ETS, and in some cases, the human government, wanted them to see. Bottom line is this: there is no benevolent ET race working with the US government, or any government else that I know of, for that matter. Moreover, many of the craft these witnesses have seen are not alien craft, but government craft. Our own technology is way ahead of what has been released to the public. And lastly, for now, there is a lot of mind control going on within the government and the military, many test programs to prepare for the future. Dr. Rosen speaks of Project Blue Beam, but it doesn't dawn to her that the same technology that would be used in such a project was also used on some of the 5,000 witnesses. The government is testing holographic technologies on their own staff to see how they will react. For example, how would a good-hearted employee react if he saw a seemingly friendly ET being shot by his superiors? That is behavior modification and behavior research. In fact, the alien that was killed could very well have been a hologram, or perhaps someone not so much alien after all. We know that they have excellent technology which can fool anyone, and which has been given to us in Technology Transfer Programs, TTP. Between ETS and the governments of the world. We let them abduct humans in exchange for technology. This fact is well documented. When I contacted Dr. Greer's staff shortly after they'd released the disclosure interviews in 2001 and mentioned that there are negative aliens as well as positive, I was met with antagonism and resentment. I found this response quite odd. But remember that Greer gets much of his funding from a faction of the Rockefeller family. This can be easily verified, because Greer doesn't make any secret of it. So again, by not acknowledging the dark side of the UFO phenomenon, we are doing mankind a huge disfavor, and projects like Disclosure and Orion can be right out dangerous. Then, of course, we have Dr. Richard Boylan at drboylan.com. He is even more fanatic about space brothers and sister and how we shall embrace them all, including the tall whites, the greys, the reptilians, and what have you. People who are on his mailing list, I've heard they are close to 1 million, call him a no-nonsense guy. Again, I beg to differ, I have hardly heard more nonsense in my life. I have been in contact with a few very intelligent, and otherwise rational people from his mailing list who are very hung-ho on Dr. Boylan. However, if someone dares to write something about negative factions of the alien societies out there, he puts these people on his bad list, and calls them everything from government to disinfo agents 8. He has probably not read my material yet, because when I checked last, I was not on his list at all. Sounds like a cult to me. In addition, Dr. Boylan has made predictions several times, but they never happened. He then explains his false prophecies away by blaming the global elite for having intentionally counteracted against his prophecies to make him look fake, and then he changes the dates of his prophecies. Oh yes, he claims psychic and prophetic abilities as well. And you know what? People on his list still believe him. Enough said. 6. Channeled, the dark entities of love and light. I am going to paraphrase the Pleiadians again, because their information has showed to be stunningly accurate. They are telling us that there are many forces of extraterrestrials and non-physicals behind the scenes, who often can leave you feeling like if Tinker Bell just sprinkled you with a truck full of the best useful dust. These non-physicals can call themselves anything and can be as slick as can be, leaving you with this, I'm blessed, I'm uplifted. This is the history of the planet. And if you enjoy that kind of thing, they begin to hook you in and then after a while they twist it. They continue by saying that we are in these times right now when we need to free ourselves from these kinds of disruptive energies and claim our power to be autonomous and sovereign. This has become even more real to me lately. There are so many channeled entities out there who are masters in making you feel good and give you false hope of a future in a fourth or fifth dimension. Although such channeled entities, or soul complexes, as they call themselves, may bring in a lot of useful information to our reality, their agenda may be far from benevolent. Again, everybody wants a piece of the pie. Anyone can feel this out for themselves and come to their own conclusions. I'm not saying you should follow my advice blindly because I say so. Make up your own mind about this, but in general, use discernment, and as a golden rule, if it is sugar-coated and sounds like it's too good to be true, it probably is. In the beginning of the third level of learning, when we are reviewing certain parts from this second level, I will give the reader a perfect example of Alpha Draconians, who show themselves off as our best buddies on a certain forum. They are very real, it's certainly not a hoax, and they manage to seduce the majority of members of the forum, until a very few, observant members manage to see through the veil of deception and expose them for what they are. You will see a stunning example of how the Dracos turn around and reveal their real selves. Their teachings include everything from love and light, ascension, the harvest, the fourth and fifth dimension, and humans being royalty. They assure us that they love humanity very much and would do anything for us, until their real selves are exposed. Many people will have a very hard time seeing through such deceptive entities, and unfortunately, humans who can't do that and follow what these entities say, will end up being toast, although they had the best of intentions. I am saying this so that the reader learns to be extremely aware of what is out there, and use extreme discernment before you buy into anything at all, even my own material. These deceptive entities may even be able to cure the ill and give eyesight back to the blind to convince you, and they have. But don't let that fool you. If you feel you have gained a lot, spiritually, the last few years or so, and you vibrate on a higher level now than you did then, I want you to think about something. Do you really feel you have, or are heading towards, a fourth or fifth dimension? Or do you feel you are still anchored here in 3D, but start tuning into other realities, dimensions, in your daily life, while still living amongst the same people as before, even those who are not interested in spiritual stuff at all? Don't you rather feel like you are opening up to realms that were invisible to you before? You get flashes of them every now and then, and synchronicities are starting to happen, among a lot of other things, like being more psychic and telepathic, perhaps? Maybe you just happen to look at your watch or clock at 11:11, 2:22, 3:33, and so on? I am personally convinced that we are not moving towards any lofty higher dimension, whether on this planet or elsewhere. We are going to stay here, in our 3D bodies, which are already set up to expand the chakras into multidimensional realms. Planet Earth is our home station from where we can extend out into the multiverse, once we are willing, daring, and have stopped agreeing to all the nonsense we've been taught by the controllers of this world and beyond. We create our own world, our own local universe, with our thoughts and actions every second of the day. What we think, decide, what plans we make, how well we execute them, etc., determines what our future will be like. You live in a nightmare? If so, time to change thought patterns. Like-minded will attract to you, and you will attract to like-minded, and when, and if, appropriate, you will probably feel the urge to be closer to those like-minded people. Communities will be built, which are independent from the controlled society, where the individual is important and will be treated similar to how you treat them, like attracts alike. Eventually, your vibration, and that of the community, will be so much higher than that of the regular society in general, that the latter will cease to exist in your reality, although it still will exist in another version of Earth. You, and others like you, will break the spell and shatter the holographic picture of reality that has been projected before all our eyes and see cosmos and its forces in a totally new light. You will feel the free flow of energy, the fluidity of the multiverse and the heavenly realm that are available to us once we have rubbed our eyes and washed away the illusions and delusions. The point is, there will not be any positive and negative harvest in the sense that the non-physicals promote. We can stay here and create our new reality on Earth, based on our own dreams and visions that we make come true in these times of accelerated energies, or we will have the choice to leave the planet altogether and find our luck somewhere else in cosmos, bringing an expanded consciousness with us. But what, then, is this talk about the harvest? As I see it, it's basically promoted for three reasons, or a mix of them all. 1. When the harvest doesn't happen, people get disillusioned and depressed, and faith in spiritual paths will diminish, meaning the powers that be, PTB, can pull back the sheep into the fold and close the gate again. 2. A form of harvest will take place, just like a rapture. Some people will confuse the two, but those who are willing to follow these benevolent forces towards a fourth and fifth dimension may get very surprised when they realize that they have been deceived and the place they are taken to is not that of love and light. 3. There will be a natural harvest, where Earth is splitting into different probabilities. Some will gladly jump into a machine world of high-tech and total enslavement, without any conscious understanding that this is what it will lead to, while others will choose a more spiritual path, closer to nature and Mother Earth, following the old ways of the Mother Goddess. Anyone is free to believe whatever they want, but I wish to put this information out there for people to consider. Personally, I will not jump on a spaceship where I'm told it's going to bring me to a better place, and I am not going to sell my soul to non-physicals who tell me that after body death I will go to a higher dimension. Instead, I will expand my internet. My inner, higher self, stay put and develop my multidimensional abilities. And after all, this is a living library where plants, animals, and humans are seeded and brought here from all parts of the universe to create this extraordinary and extremely rare library as an experiment. Can you imagine a more beautiful planet than our own Earth? In the future, there will inevitably be a splitting of worlds, where people will live in frequencies so different from each other that they will literally live on different versions of Earth, where those of the lower vibrations can't perceive those of the higher. But it will be a slow, gradual process that has already started and is happening right now, and you are contributing by changing your thought process and your intentions. We can't accomplish anything that great for ourselves if we don't know what is going on around us. Information is the key. Then after that, change will occur. When people realize they live as slaves to a clique of super rich people, run by invisible, interdimensional forces, they can start changing their pattern and dream up new realities. Remember, you create your own reality by making the right choices and then act upon them as explained earlier. Still, all of those humans who choose to stay here will still be living on what we consider Mother Earth. Doesn't this make much more sense? Isn't this more of what you see happening around you and within yourself? No one is going to save you, you are your own savior, and that is a good thing, because you can create the exact future you want. But first, to be able to do so, you need to look at all aspects of reality, dark, gray, and light, or you won't have the knowledge required to keep disruptive forces and thoughts away. And if you can't, your energy field will not be clear enough to pull your ideas through. Have you felt lately that you wish with all your might that you didn't need to take part of any of that which is going on in society today? Does your work not make sense anymore? Are the executive decisions at work right out insane? Have you noticed lately that it becomes even more obvious that you are just a slave to some diffuse forces you can't put your finger on? Do you feel that the world's gone so insane lately that you don't want to have any part of it anymore? Have you seen people whom you used to like suddenly change and become selfish to the extreme, especially at work, and maybe even start attacking you? Do you find all the new technology that is constantly bombarding the market as one of the worst things that has happened to mankind and you feel totally alienated to it? Have you ever been concerned when you see a group of young children, who are supposed to mingle and talk and have fun, instead are walking down the street together while texting on the phones instead of talking to each other? Have you experienced any or all of the above and feel extremely tired of it? Then you are already heading towards a new reality. The splitting of worlds is very, very real, and more people than we think are slowly but surely breaking away from the insanity around them. I, personally, can't even imagine myself living in a future which contains any or all of the above. The first thing that happens is that we mentally start breaking out from the insanity, and eventually action will follow, and most of the time it will come naturally. This is the last of 3 metaphysical papers. Now we will take a closer look on who the star races are who are manipulating us being the scenes, working hard to create the machine world, and why. We will also learn much more about who we really are and where we come from. This will probably be a very different experience than you have experienced before, regardless of which material you have studied.